River and Cloth is an 18-month project exploring the history of the textile industry in Merton. In particular, it's looking at the stories of William Morris, who had his factory and workshops here in the late 19th century, at the site that's now occupied by Savour Centre, and Arthur Liberty, who moved his workshop and factories here at Merton Abbey Mills around the same time. It also looks at contributions made to the textile industry through groups of refugees, such as the Huguenots, who began to move into the area in the late 17th century and set themselves up as dyers, bleachers and printers of calico. There's one very successful printer called Peter Malverlane, who set up a printing works, one in Wandsworth and one in Mitcham at the site now occupied by Ravensbury Mill. And he was a very successful printer. He ended up employing 250 local people. The aim of the project is really quite simple. What we want to do is to get local people involved in their own history of their local area. So to get them to learn more about the heritage of Merton and kind of what it has to do with them. Merton's a really diverse area and the textile industry is really diverse. If you look at the different kind of cultural influences that kind of exist within the industry, so you have someone like William Morris, who was incredibly influenced by Islamic design, and you can see that repeated. A lot of the patterns, motifs and designs from the Middle East, from India, reoccurring in his work. Arthur Liberty, for example, was incredibly influenced by culture and art and design, and he travelled all around the world collecting ideas that he went on to eventually absorb into Liberty's design aesthetic and sell in his store. This started when he was 18 years old, and he went to the second great exhibition in London, which had art and design objects from all around the world. And I think those cultural influences, exposing what they are, that even though this was a very local industry that was taking place in Merton, but it was influenced by design and pattern and material and techniques that were coming from all over the world, is really, really important to draw out for River and Cloth, because it reflects the diversity of the borough. The way in which we engage local people in the community of Merton, we engage them in different ways. We work with teachers and volunteers, what we call a professional development programme. The way that the project is structured, it's structured into 3 different stages: dye, hand stitch and embroidery, and printing. And we have a lead artist for each of those stages. And what the lead artist does is design a whole stage of workshop activities, which they then pass on and teach to the teachers of Merton schools and volunteers who are involved in our project. And the reason why we do that is because we want the skills to stay in the area once the project finishes. So that means teachers can pass on what they've learnt in these different techniques, not only to the children in their schools, but also their colleagues, their peers. With the volunteers, some of those are actually based in the local community, so it means that they can then pass them on to their peers, to community groups, so that once the project finishes, all the skills don't move out with the project. It kind of works in a very cascading way. What then happens is the artist works together with a team of volunteers and with a teacher to go into the schools and deliver workshops.
For the dyeing phase, I took inspiration from William Morris, who had a print and weave workshop on the site of the current Sainsbury's. The workshop was set up in 1881 and continued until after Morris's death. William Morris dyed and printed his fabrics exclusively using natural dyes because he preferred the softer tones to the newly introduced synthetic dyes. So I chose to use natural dyes for the dyeing phase of the project. I wanted to work with the traditional dyes that William Morris used. That's indigo for his blues, madder for the red, and weld for the yellow.
I approached this project, the task of working with this huge range of people of all ages, as a whole design in itself, actually, because I've come from a design background. I think of the end result and how I'm going to achieve that. And so after studying brief, to come up with a workshop activity that a whole range of ages and abilities could achieve in quite a short amount of time, involving sewing, and also about the history of the local textiles in Merton.
So for the block printing phase, I've used Liberties as the main source of inspiration. Liberties was very much inspired by prints from the Orient, so I decided to look at Paisley designs, which kind of played quite a big part in textiles throughout the ages, and also to link in the Tree of Life, which many of the schools have seen at the V&A project, which William Morris was inspired by, so it was a nice way to link the two. I've taken a more sort of modern day approach to block printing, because to actually create a block takes about 3 months, which in a workshop situation is not very feasible. So we're using a Presto form to actually carve into, so the children can make their own blocks, and they'll be creating Paisley shapes which will then be printed onto the Tree of Life.
I'm really happy with the team of artists that we've got involved in this project, because they have the right kind of technical and creative skills to lead their stage, but they also have the right kind of people skills. They know how to design a program that's very flexible and responds to the different learning needs of the different people involved in this project. So I think that's been a very strong element of the project, and it's the same with the volunteers. A lot of them are students who are studying textiles or art, but they haven't had that much experience of teaching textile craft or doing a workshop scenario with different groups of people. So they're gaining that experience that's going to help them in their career later on, and they're learning and developing those very strong people skills. We also have volunteers who don't necessarily have an art or textiles background, but I think got involved in the project because they wanted to learn more about their local area and get more involved with the different communities that work together here.
I got involved because I live in Wimbledon and I didn't really know much about the local history, and I'd sort of heard of Merton Abbey Mills, and when Claire mentioned the project that was going ahead, I decided, well, this is a really good opportunity to get to know a bit about the history and find out about the area that I live in.
One of the community groups I worked on was the Merton and Morden Guild. And these ladies came in, and I was thinking it was going to be maybe a very long afternoon because they didn't seem terribly enthusiastic about it at first. But we had a really good talk by a William Morris expert. And then they got into the stitching for the trellis design, and they absolutely loved it. I think quite a few of them had done stitching way in the past, and it had sort of faded out and was something they hadn't pursued recently. And they all really enjoyed the project and got a lot out of it, and said they had forgotten how much they really loved stitching and embroidery, and planned to sort of revisit it in personal projects and things.
This is a first attempt at a bit of tapestry, and it's supposed to be a bird, I think.
You got it upside down?
No, which way? That way, Flo.
No,
This is a bird. This is a fish bird.
Hillary, do you know I put my all into this, and you're making fun of it.
I'm not making fun.
It was fantastic. It really was, and the people that were there to help you thread of the needle.
Oh, they did have a lot of patience.
They had an awful lot of patience with us. It was fantastic.
I haven't done anything like this since I was at school, so that was many years ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I also went to the other two things that we did and enjoyed them all, and it would be nice to have another one.
This is my work from the embroidery we've done, and we thoroughly enjoy the facilities we have here. I've also done some of the river and cloth, and it's amazing what we could do from natural trees, natural colours and so on, the dyes we produce, and that was very, very good.
My memory went back to my childhood, where I used to learn how to do embroidery stitches. And it has been a very good experience.
I've done enough, you have a go.
No, I'm lost for words.
I mean, that makes a change.
With some of the participants from the community groups, for example the Tamil Welfare Group, they use the workshops that we did with them as part of a vocational qualification in tailoring. So it's great that those things can also, as well as being very enjoyable and recreational activities, they're actually building up people's ambitions and experience and aspirations, which is a really positive thing. We've been really happy to work with local organisations like Merton Abbey Mills and Wandle Industrial Museum, who I've mentioned, but also we worked with Dean City Farm, and in particular their Growing Gardens project. So we grew plants and flowers here for dyeing. We had a bed of quite regular flowers such as marigolds, violas, carnations to make dye, but we also grew traditional dyeing plants, which is madder and woad, and they're growing in this bed here. And this is the madder here, which you can't see, you wouldn't believe looking at it now that it actually creates a red dye, but if you look at the roots here, they're very red, and this is where the dye comes from the actual roots of the plant. And then we're also growing woad, which produces a blue dye very similar in colour to indigo, and these are these very tall plants with the yellow flower. So we'll create a blue dye to use for our eco dyeing projects. It's also great to get feedback from the participants in the workshop themselves. We've had lots of younger children saying they want to be artists or designers when they grow up. So it's great that it's opened up, I guess, aspirations, and a lot of them really admire Arthur Liberty because they see him as quite entrepreneurial and quite fashionable. The fact that his designs still have an impact on contemporary fashion, so I think they can relate a lot to that.
Clare and the artist came to Bond to do some natural dyes, and we had piece of fabric which we could choose any type of flower and any colours, and we put it, and then we used a hammer and a wood thing, and we really had to press it hard, and then at the end when it was dry we could see our patterns, and we even used a boiler to put our fabrics in, which made it really hot and smelly. And we had to leave it for 6 or 4 weeks until it was done. Then after the 6 or 4 weeks, we opened it, and it looks really fabulous because it had colours, and one was red and one was a green-blue type thing.
I think I've definitely learnt enough to do a workshop, not necessarily just with the art group, but with the day centre as well, and get them to produce something exciting. I think I would do all of them again, and I thought they've all been really beneficial. It's proved to me that actually children can do those sorts of things, and they're not going to go home covered in indigo dye or anything like that, and it's actually really easy. You don't have to sort of dress them from head to toe in plastic and everything else like that.
At the Industrial Wandle Museum, we saw a video of the Victorians. I think it was they had a really long table, and they had a big long bit of silk, and they had huge blocks which they pressed down, and they pinned it so it could stay in place so that it didn't move.
It took 3 to 7 months to finish the long material, and because they done it all by hand, because then they didn't have machines to do it.
It was really lovely to see how many different designs people make from their Paisley patterns. It's been a real wow after they see their first print.
And grab the little tab
Pick it up and you got your prints.
Today we started off doing designs for our blocks, and then we dried it on some polystyrene, and we actually made it, and we stuck it on some cardboard so we can have our own blocks.
One of the things I think is that when we look at the local area, very often we do things like the traffic problem in Mitcham, or we do the pollution in Mitcham, or the rubbish in Mitcham. And actually it's been really a good project to say what's really good about Mitcham. And what we were looking at a Victorian house, and we were, because they're making models of Victorian rooms, and we were looking on the internet, and there was a picture, and we looked at the wallpaper, and I said, so look at the wallpaper, who might have designed it? They went, William Morris! And I thought it was just really nice that William Morris should have come from somewhere around here, and that and they felt pleased with themselves that they knew about that. Do you know what I mean? So I think that actually something to be proud of in Merton has really been quite. They had a link with William Morris, you know, a world-renowned person, you know, so I thought that was really beneficial.
I can remember a particular boy who's got particular behaviour problems during the stitch project, sitting there stitching away going, this is really fun. And, you know, and it was just great, it was just such a great quote, you know, and if only we could have had that on film, because, you know, it's always, with him, it's always the negative things and the behaviour and everything like that, and he was really thoroughly enjoying himself.
Well, I have been a bit concerned that this hand embroidery, and particularly sewing little flowers and birdies, was going to be seen as a bit sissy for some of the boys, but I was pleased to